Hi, I'm Rick Reynolds, founder and president of Affair Recovery. And today we're doing part 2 on our series of shame. Shame is that sense that you're unacceptable because of something you did, something done to you, or something associated with you that leaves you feeling exposed and humiliated. Last week we talked about the shame that comes from something that you did. For instance, if in the case of infidelity, if someone actually, has an affair, that action in and of itself creates a shame because of their behavior. But this week, I want to talk about that third category, which is the shame that comes from being associated with something that feels shameful or it is shameful. That's what I call social shame or ascribed shame. It's the primary shame I think that a betrayed spouse feels. So let me explain honor and shame. So Western culture, we're basically based on individualism. And our sense of worth, our sense of honor is based on performance. And so if we fail, then we can feel shame. One of the reasons ascribed shame seems like a foreign concept to us is because our culture, North America, and also Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, those cultures are basically based on individualism. So our sense of honor and our sense of shame comes from our individual performance. However, the vast people groups of the world, such as, the Middle East, South America, those cultures are actually what we would call honor-shame based. So a person's worth is primarily based on not what you accomplish or don't, but the people group that you're associated with. So the reason perhaps a Chinese or a Japanese child is going to do well in school isn't because they want to achieve. It's because they don't want to bring dishonor to their family. And if dishonor is brought, it's really important to restore the honor of the family. Sometimes that's actually done through crimes that we call honor violence. And if you look up honor violence and Google it, you'll see many cases where somebody felt dishonored by a family member, especially from a different culture, and they killed that person or they hurt that person in order to restore their sense of honor. Or perhaps in World War II, if you think about in Japan, if you dishonored Japan, the way you restored the honor of your country was ultimately to commit suicide, to kill yourself, and that was the way that you could restore honor. Because they understood if you've been dishonored, you need to get rid of the person who has dishonored you to restore your honor. In fact, it feels dishonorable to stay with someone who dishonored you. And when it comes to marriage, that's a closed system, however. And if your mate does something that's shameful because you're connected to them, now you experience the shame associated with what they did. In the same way that we may feel honor. If our mate does something that's really honorable, people think more highly of us because we're associated with them. Or even if we have friends who are really honorable, people will think more of us just because we're friends of that person. Why do you think people name drop and say they're associated with this person? But also in people groups, we experience other types of shame. Let's say that perhaps you're associated with a church where a pastor has a moral failure. The shameful thing he did is now associated with everybody, in that church, and everybody feels that shame. It happens even with football teams. If Dallas wins, we sit there and we get the honor that comes from the Dallas Cowboys winning. But if they lose and they have a losing season, then we experience that shame. So we also, even in Western culture, have this honor-shame concept. In fact, all world wars are based on honor-shame, where one country feels dishonored or disrespected by another country, and they're trying to right that wrong through the war. And a mistake I think that many who are betrayed make is they blame themselves for the shame that they're feeling. And they live in self-contempt because they somehow think that they caused it. When in reality, what's causing their shame isn't what they've done. It's not even about them. What's causing their shame is what their mate has done. And so we kind of will slip into trying to think that it's about us, that it comes from something we did, but it's really coming, I think, from being associated with someone who's dishonored you. And that feeling of shame is even going to be exacerbated, especially if your mate's telling you somehow through gaslighting or their own moral justifications at the time that you did do it. They somehow blame you. And so you go into self-contempt and even increase the shame when it really wasn't even about you. If it was something you did, you could easily correct the shame and the guilt and everything by simply taking responsibility for, your failure. But how do you take responsibility for their failure? It's difficult to start feeling honorable if that honor or that dishonor is causing the shame. How do you correct that? The challenge for this type of shame is, how are you supposed to restore your sense of honor when you weren't the one who screwed up? In fact, it's really about us. One of the things I believe when you look at a couple, a marriage, it's you, it's them, it's us. And infidelity is something that's done to us, not just you. If I screw up and do something resulting in shame, it's easy to self-correct. Just get my act together, change my behavior, overcome it. But if I didn't do it, that shame is coming from feeling disrespected or unworthy. In a survey we conducted at Affair Recovery back in the summer of 2015, where we had almost 2,000 respondents, 95% of those who were betrayed reported feeling a loss of self-worth, even though they weren't the ones who cheated. 75% felt ashamed for even staying in the marriage. They were feeling shame for being with someone who dishonored them. When asked, what did you think others thought of you as a result of that affair? The answer swung somewhere between, I was a doormat, I'm weak, it was your fault, what weren't you doing, if only you'd been a better wife, to the other extreme of, you need to forgive and get over it. Why are you still struggling? It's been 4 weeks. They ask you to forgive them. What's wrong with you? But almost all of them felt judged. There were a few who answered, I don't know and I don't care. But 90% felt that the opinion others had of them as a result of the infidelity was really negative. At the same time, out of that 90%, 65% reported not even letting anybody know what had happened. They just felt people's opinion of them was more negative as a result. It's that shame you feel. I know Stephanie felt that same shame. Even going into a bookstore to buy a book on infidelity, afterwards, it's like checking out at the counter. She felt the other people were judging her and thinking there was something wrong with her because her husband had cheated on her, when there was no way in the world that they knew that was the case. But she still felt that ascribed shame for being associated with me. Out of the 1,183 responses to what others thought about you, there were about 11 responses saying things like, they thought I actually was a person of integrity for staying and worked through, and were proud of me for working through this, or that I showed great character, or that I was amazing and loving. But even those individuals reported that they were only sharing with people that they thought in the long run would be safe. So the shame from someone you're associated with, to me, is a very real thing. And one of the questions I've been really wrestling with is, how do you restore your self-respect or your sense of honor? Is it through anger? I love this quote by James Gilligan, former director of mental health in Massachusetts prison system, the author of a book called Violence. And he says this, I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed and humiliated, disrespected or ridiculed, and that did not represent an attempt to prevent or undo this loss of face. The purpose of violence is to diminish the intensity of shame and replace it as far as possible with the opposite, pride, thus preventing the individual from being overwhelmed by those feelings of shame. And how many, of you, and it may be you as you watch this video, go, yeah, I felt that need to hurt or to be violent in a sense to restore my sense of shame. Sometimes people try to restore their sense of honor, maybe by leaving, even though staying might have been a good idea, but it's just the shame is too intense. Or at other times, maybe the way they try to restore their honor may not be through physical violence, but it's through others' contempt. And they keep putting other people down and they become extremely judgmental in an attempt to be able to feel more self-righteous. But I just find so many people get stuck in this sort of shame because they don't identify where the shame is actually coming from. Certainly isolating and cutting yourself off from other people isn't going to be the thing that ultimately heals the shame. It may protect you from feeling shame if you're around other people, but that isolation is sad. I want you to be able to walk around with your head up and to feel good about yourself and to be willing to share your story and think that ultimately you're amazing again. So, are you stuck in shame? If so, next week in part 3, I'm going to give some suggestions of how you can recover that healthy sense of self, your self-respect, your sense of worth once again, and feel honorable to healing.